For those of you who've been watching me for quite some time cover college football, you know I'm intrigued by the Boston College football program and their ability during good times to compete with the very best in college football. Maybe not on a weekly basis, but considering the recruiting challenges to be able to do it periodically. And also, you know that one of my favorite guests, even though we're not able to reel him in quite as often as we used to, is Dan Rubin from BCEagles.com. It's Eagles Unlimited. Dan, how you doing?
Hey, I'm glad to be back. Maybe I got more free time on my hands. I should start making more. I need to make more appearances. I shouldn't. I should. I need to, because this is college football season's what's keeping us going right now.
It is. It's keeping us going, but is anything going to be allowed to keep it going? That's certainly the question that's out there in various forms in various regions of the country, depending on who you're listening to, depending on who you eventually believe is going to hold the power in all this. It seems to be that there's going to be a bit of a tug back and forth between local governments, conference commissioners, and university officials. So I don't know what you're hearing on your end of the spectrum there in Boston, but how's it stand?
Well, right now I know that the Boston College actually announced it was planning to have students back on in the fall. That was an announcement that I know that I think they sent out to their student base to prepare for that. I know that from a city standpoint, I can't speak too much to the decision making on what that means for football or anything like that. I do know that there are, and when we've talked to Jeff Hafley, the new head coach of the Eagles, that there have been things that have been discussed, different scenarios and everything that they've had internally. So if they can make it happen, I'm sure they will, and I'm sure it'll be the safest possible, especially up here. I mean, I know Massachusetts is kind of a different perspective than maybe some of the other states, just because of how hard we've been hit here, unfortunately. So, I'm sure they'll work out whatever they can, and hopefully we'll have football this year. I'm kind of looking forward to getting back to, if we can do it safely. That's always, I think, the most important thing, to get the athletes trained and to get them safe and protected and everything that goes with it. And I'm looking forward to football. I don't know where and when it's going to happen, but I'm sure as heck just looking forward to getting football season in a sense of normalcy back whenever it comes.
Being one state to the south, I can certainly relate, and we've taken our hits here as well. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Boston College Eagles under Jeff Hafley's reign, year number 1. We've got Dan Rubin on the line from Eagles Unlimited. Please join him and the rest of the staff right there to get your take on Boston College. So it's difficult enough, as you well know, Dan, to take over a major football program, have the complete off season, individual workouts, summer workouts, of course, spring practice, and everything that goes into the cycle of preparing for the football season. But when all that's pulled away from you and you're trying to learn a roster, learn tendencies, learn the kids' names, build relationships, have an entire coaching staff that's been basically turned over from top to bottom, have them build the relationships, new schemes, new terminology, up and down, new structure, different culture, environment. This is a monumental feat for any first-year head coach to try to deal with a major football program turnover without all of the usual practices in play.
Yeah, I don't envy anyone on that coaching staff. I don't at all. They had 5 practices during spring ball. That's it. They, to their credit, they actually, I guess, got most of their from what they told us. They said they got most of their offenses installed, most of the defensive terminology, and they were able to work through it. I don't think they handled situational football or stuff like that. Like, I don't think they were running through a 2-minute drill, but they did have their ability to go through and learn the players, get a little bit involved in that. I think the hardest part you mentioned was just getting to know them. Coach Hafley, when he had a press conference and Zoomed with a number of the media, said that the hardest thing for him, being a guy who values personal relationships and personal face time, was needing to switch and do it virtually, and you can't be there for your athletes the same way. There are mental needs, there are emotional needs, especially right now, and especially when you're getting ready for football. It's making it very difficult, and they readily admit that it's not something that anybody at BC certainly wants to deal with, but they're doing the best they can, and running through the playbook, doing it as virtually as possible. They've all latched onto the virtual environment as much as possible, simulating routines like they would normally have had with academic time and with training time, and hopefully, like I said, when they get back to football, it's going to be really interesting just to see how that then plays out on a football field when you're not throwing at the donut tire and the tire swing, as opposed to throwing at an actual receiver. So it's interesting. I mean, it's a heck of a storyline, and it's going to be really fun and interesting from a viewer standpoint to see what happens this first year.
Folks, we started to talk to Dan around 2013, 2014, and I would like this not to get lost among college football fans. BC was fielding some of the best defenses in the country, statistically, arguably the best defense in the country for 2 or 3 years there. They have fallen off considerably, been able to maintain remarkably the same winning level of about 7-5, 6-6, 7-6 in that range with a bowl game each year for the most part. But the defense has fallen off considerably. Now you get a head coach who, with his NFL pedigree, bringing in a ton of guys that he knew from around that time when he was with the 49ers and other teams. What he did with that Ohio State defense, taking all that talent that underachieved in 2018 and then turned it into arguably the best unit in the country in 2019. You've got to be excited, along with Boston College fans, about what's possible. Maybe it's going to be difficult to get all that gain back this year, but what Jeff Hafley's certainly shown us, and then combine that with what the legacy's been at BC.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we had a media day back before spring practice started, and we got to meet with all the coaches and talk to every single one of them. It was a long day, but it was probably one of the most rewarding days I think I've had since I started covering this team, just because I got to ask every coach, what drew you, how'd you get your start? What drew you here? What drew you to BC? What drew you to your defensive line of thinking? And the knowledge that goes into that room is going to be intense, because you have guys who are young, who are experienced in some regards, who have fresh outlooks, that are all coming together to play this style under Jeff Hafley that he has kind of mentally envisioned, and everyone's sharing the vision with him. You've got defensive line coach who I know worked with him in San Francisco, Vince Ogabasi, who was a defensive lineman at Duke, who, by the way, still looks like he could play on the other side of the line. That is the largest man I've ever seen in my life. You have Sean Duggan, who's a former BC guy who played for BC back in 2013 and 2014, who sat next to Jeff Hafley in the Ohio State press box in the coach's box as I believe a defensive assistant. You have other guys who are coming in. Azar, I can't remember his name. Abdul Rahim, I think his last name is. He was a coach at UMass, who's a defensive secondaries guy who coached J.C. Jackson at Maryland. These are guys who have great knowledge, great pedigree, great background, and they're all going to come together and share this vision that they have under Jeff Hafley for Boston College. And when you add in the returning personnel, Max Richardson decided to come back this year after having 100 tackles last year. Guys like him, Brandon Sebastian in the secondary, TJ Ram as a defensive tackle, Tate Haynes is in the secondary, Jason Maitre in the secondary, Isaiah McDuffie back after redshirting last year. He'd been hurt most of the year as a linebacker. There is a lot of returning talent that I think is going to be excited to work with these guys and get a fresh outlook, not necessarily play the same style, and not have to hear the same stories of, well, they're growing, or this is a growing pain, or that is a growing pain. You get to move forward and say that everybody's growing together. There is no experience factor when you're talking about a defensive line that returns everybody, or a secondary returns everybody. Everybody's on the same blank page to start, and everybody gets to grow together instead of relying on one piece to overcompensate for the other.
Yeah, Richardson with a big 2019 season with 108 tackles, one of the top figures in the country, 14 and a half tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. And just to put some metrics on what Hafley accomplished at Ohio State, and of course he had some help, but certainly Ohio State had all the talent you would have wanted the previous season, but they ranked 71st in the nation in points against, 72nd in yards against, and that's just unheard of at Ohio State. He steps in, they revise the defense, they simplify and cut the athletes loose. Number one in total defense last year, number one in yards per play, number one in sacks, number one in tackles for loss. And again, if you want an education on what BC has put up defensively in the last 10 years, go back and check out the numbers from 2013, 14, 15 in that range, and you will see something similar. But last year, as you well know, Dan, 110th in sack rate, 106th in yards per play, yards per game. Just not good defensive numbers, but you got some guys coming back, as you mentioned. And as Hafley actually mentioned that any type of, he's not going to lay out the scheme per se, but what could be a difference in approach this year?
I think the big thing, and this was something I asked, was when I asked about during one of the media calls or during a press conference with him, I asked him straight up about what he sees the evolution of the game, just how the game has changed since he was working under Greg Schiano at Rutgers and went with him to Tampa Bay and moved around. And I asked him, how it's changed, and he said you got to play hard, you have to believe, you have to work together. Share the same vision at the coaching level, share the same vision with the players, and put them in a position to win. I feel like the scheme of the defense is going to look a little bit different. I don't know that you have to scheme to your personnel. That's one of the most obvious pieces of it. But I think that it's gonna look different just because, like I said, when defense the last couple of years kind of got choppy, where you'd look at the secondary was great, but they would need to get linebackers. The linebackers were injured. I think it was 2016 or 2017 where the linebackers just continually got injured by stroke of bad luck. 2017. And it was a horrible string of injuries that hit that front seven. So you had the secondary compensate for that, and you had to grow and grow these young linebackers. Well, that then translated into 2018 where everything was kind of there, but you deal with an injury or two and it really hits you hard. That turns to last year where you have to replace all these parts. And so you have, one graduating defensive lineman, but you have linebackers. You take an injury there. You have returning defensive backs, but you have to replace the safeties. And it gets to a place where maybe a lineman is a step ahead of a secondary piece, or a secondary piece ahead of a lineman on 1 week. It'll be really nice under Coach Hafley that he can work with the linebackers, work with the defensive line, that he's a secondary guy who knows how to defend the pass-happy offenses that exist, especially in the ACC with teams like Clemson and teams that you see with Virginia Tech spread offense. So it'll be really nice to see how that all works together. The defensive coordinator, Tem Lukabu, is a former linebackers coach at the NFL. He knows how to defend against the pass and work within the scheme, which will change. There's no way it can't change when you're dealing with different coaches. To work those pieces together and say, look, third level, second level, first level, front seven, back four, all of those pieces need to work at once, which I think the last couple of years, the defense, just by happenstance, I don't necessarily know it was anyone's fault. It just happened where a piece would get out of sync and would fall out of whack with the other pieces.
Breaking down BC with Dan Rubin from Eagles Unlimited here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe. That way you get the bell. Turn that thing on. You get the notifications to know when we go live most days throughout the week. And, of course, we're setting you up for 2020 with previews across the nation. Looking at the offense, Dan, your quarterback's gone, Anthony Brown. If anybody's talking BC football over the last 3 years and the first name out of anybody's mouth is going to be A.J. Dillon, he's gone, of course, off to the NFL, although David Bailey's a capable replacement at 5.7 yards per carry. Your thoughts about the offense and what's coming back?
Well, I hope the NCAA is listening to the appeals for waivers because if the waivers are granted, this offense is going to be good. They Phil Jerkovic, Jurkovec, that's how you pronounce it, from
Yeah, the
Notre
Notre
Dame.
Dame transfer.
Yep,
Yeah.
he transferred in, and that settles that's going to be he's going to be a huge lift if he gets that immediate eligibility. It's not his job to win right now or lose. It's an open competition. It's whoever can pick it up fastest. And remember, these teams haven't. This team has only had 5 practices. So if Dennis Grosel, who played in place of Anthony Brown last year, picks it up quicker and just has the experience, he will play. I mean, that's the thing to get across, is that Coach Hafley did say it's an open competition. But you're bringing in a guy like Jurkovec, and he's got all that eligibility left. And if he gets approved with that waiver, he's a very good quarterback. As a former 4-star guy, really fits the offense with his build and his arm, that spread style that I think BC might be able to go to, given the fact that they've got Kobe White coming back, Hunter Long at tight end. They've got very good tight ends. They've still got one running back in David Bailey. They've got, I'm just running down receivers in my head. Zay Flowers, a guy with speed. This guy's like that. Ethan Williams, a guy with speed at the receiver position, and another transfer in the form of Jalen Gill, who I don't know if he's going to sit out a year or if that's a waiver or what's going on there. I have no idea. But when you think about Jurkovec and Gill coming together at Boston College, you're dealing with a Notre Dame quarterback and an Ohio State wide receiver guy who can really start to move the ball. So it's a lot of unknown. You've still got an offensive line that can blow everybody off the ball. But what happens with that offense, I think next month it could look something different than it does right now. And it's just going to be really interesting what happens by the time the season rolls around.
Yeah, when Jalen Gill stepped on campus at Ohio State, his recruiting ranking coming out of high school was 2nd in the nation, all-purpose back, number 30, regardless of position. So we're talking about all positions, rank all the players. If you're top 300, you're pretty elite. Number 30 in the nation, regardless of position. So we're talking about an elite talent. Those numbers come from 247 Sports Composite. You mentioned Kobe White, one of the top wide receivers in the ACC, caught 29 last year with 5 touchdowns. Zay Flowers, an interesting guy that they like to line up in different ways, jet sweeps, end arounds, get him in space to do things. So you get your 2 big playmakers back. Grosel, what was your evaluation of him? 48%, a little scatter shot, but a decent 9-3 touchdown to pick ratio.
Look, I love him as a person. He's so smart. He's a great kid, intelligent. He knows that he was a former walk-on, and he worked really hard to get to number 2 on the depth chart last year. It was everything had to break the right way to give him an opportunity. And when I say the right way, I don't want that to come out horrible. EJ Perry transferred down to FCS. He was the backup in 2018. 2019, Dennis Grosel comes on, beats out Matt Valecchi for the second string behind Anthony Brown. Anthony Brown goes down injured. Well, now Dennis Grosel has to play, and Grosel, when he could do what he could do, and he's very smart. He can pick up the offense. He would run. He had a heart of a lion. He wouldn't care if he was taking a pounding back there. From a passer standpoint, I'm sure he'd be the first one to admit he probably wasn't the best passer on the team. Definitely was Anthony Brown was a much better passer in a pro style offense. I don't know if Valecchi would have been better suited to throw downfield or anything like that, but Grosel could throw downfield. He could throw over the top of the defense. It just turned into the wrong plays at the wrong times. There was a lot of running that power offense that I think maybe took away from his ability to throw it or develop the ability to throw it, because you were trying to run the ball so frequently. So I like him. He's a great kid. He's smart. He's intelligent. He's got the great locker room leadership. And, he's made a lot of people happy at Boston College. When you talk about a guy who was a former walk-on, he was not, the 4-star athlete, and he worked his way up the depth chart, and that's all you could ask for out of him.
Got Dan Rubin on the line talking Boston College football for 2020. We are hopeful there's going to be a season. In what format? Limited games, obviously limited attendance, but we just want to see football and see it close to on time and obviously operated in a safe environment. Talking Eagles again in 2020. And just in regards to the offense, you alluded to the offensive line. We love to talk skill position players. Those are the guys that have the ball in their hands. Those are the guys that are fun to watch and talk about. But Ben Petrula, an all-ACC performer with 36 starts under his belt. Zion Johnson, also an all-ACC guy. I saw in the notes a 3-time offensive lineman of the week in the ACC last year. So you do lose a couple guys up front, but again, we can talk skill position players all we want, but they look a lot better when they don't have like 3 guys on their back because the offensive line's doing its job.
Yeah, those guys, the big nasties, I love them. Zion Johnson's going to be real fun to watch this year. The new offensive line coach, Matt Applebaum, coached and recruited Zion to Davidson before he transferred up. So they're reuniting. Applebaum, also another younger coach who's got a pedigree. I believe he played at Connecticut and coached at Davidson. He's a real intelligent guy, man. That interview with him, I could have listened to him talk O-line all day. You've got him. You've got Petrula is just a beast of a blocker who can run through everybody. Tyler Vrabel is going to be back. Some people got introduced to him in the background of Mike Vrabel's draft room during the NFL draft. With the kids were standing around. One was wearing the free suit. He was the one all the way in the background, sitting in the background. Tyler is a big boy who knows how to play football. Again, got pedigree that just can't be topped. And Alec Lindstrom is back. He's a guy who I really want to see make a jump. He's spent a lot of time, I know, at home this year, studying, getting bigger, getting stronger. His brother, I know, has been home, Chris, as well, from the Atlanta Falcons, who was a first-round pick. I know they're probably, working out together and chatting, doing football stuff together again. Alec is such a smart guy and a great team personality. Heck of a baker too. If you ever search for him on YouTube, the guy is a food reviewer and loves doing his cooking and baking, and why not? He's an offensive lineman. He'll eat everything, right?
I need somebody who can actually come to the house and do it for me, not teach me how to do it. I'm too lazy to learn how to cook.
Same.
Talking BC with Dan Rubin. Interesting out-of-conference schedule. Kansas obviously jumped out and shocked everyone with a win in 3-score fashion against BC last year. There's a game against Purdue out of conference. The one game that rotates in the ACC Coastal comes up on North Carolina, which may turn out to be the best team in that division. A lot of people are projecting. So what is a successful season considering all the challenges that exist for everybody, but of course, more so for a first-year head coach in regards to long-range success? But in 2020, what would you like to see?
I just want to see him play. No, I think it's going to be. I think a lot is going to be dependent on how the team gets out of the break. It's a really tough matchup right off the start. I mean, if we're operating under just looking at the schedule, you're starting the season pretty tough because you're hosting Syracuse. It's a massive rivalry game, and given the fact that you didn't have your spring ball, and again, this is entirely assuming that something that we don't know, that September 4th would roll around in a rivalry atmosphere with fans and everything else, just pure football assumption. For whatever reason, things are great. That's a tough game to come out of the jump with. And then you have two teams in Kansas and Purdue that have both beat you. Kansas last year was a surprise to surprise, especially after the way the game started. That Les Miles always can pull something out of his hat, and that's now out there. So you didn't win the game at home. So now you have to go out there and play them. That's your first road game. It's going to be a very different look for BC in terms of that's your first road game. How do you handle the trip? How do you handle the players and everything that goes with it? In Purdue a couple of years ago, that was a shellacking. That was not a close game. I believe BC lost that game 35 or 33 or 31-7 or something like that. That was not a close game. And then you roll right into conference schedule where you've got Clemson in October. So it's going to be a very tough ride. How you measure success is, I mean, you know me, every time I get asked about records, I never pinpoint one. But I just would love to see this team come out and gel quickly and see what happens from there, because the lack of practice is going to is a hurdle to overcome. The off-season training, the fact that you're doing caveman workouts in the outback and lifting book bags and moving Jeeps instead of working with your strength coach adds another hurdle. and the new coaching staff coming in, opening up with a conference game that first weekend, there's no walkthrough. And by the time everything gets rolling, it would have been really nice to say, yeah, open up with Ohio at home and then roll into Holy Cross. But that's just not the way it's going to happen. So it's going to be dicey. It's going to be interesting. And, when I say dicey, it's just because we don't know. And you don't know what you don't know until the team steps on the field.
So Dan doesn't know, doesn't want to pretend that he knows, but I know a lot of you think you know. So leave your Boston College record down in the comments section. We love to kick it around, obviously, here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Catch Dan and the rest of the staff there at Eagles Unlimited at bceagles.com. Dan, we appreciate you stopping by.
Hey, like I said, I need to do this more often, and while we have the time to talk some college football, I'm all in. I just hope everyone's staying safe, and to all your listeners, I look forward to talking down the line. I hope everybody's safe and stays that way for a long, long time to come.